we need to try to be done on time. So that means short answers also. There are two things I want to talk about today. One is related to scientific discoveries and science, and the other one is related to the problem of importing and adapting a technique, an acting technique or a kind of work from one culture to another culture. Maybe we should start from that. Because, for example, because some of the techniques are created or are generated from not just a teacher but in a certain context, social context and historical context, and in a certain culture. Like, for example, when you build with the technique also outside of the US, you still have actors to do repetition in English. You don't work on repetition in Norwegian, for example.
I could if I knew Norwegian.
I'll just get there to the list. Because there is like there are many of these workshops all over the world, teachers that travel, but I have the feeling that there are some problems that are more, or some resistances or some blocks that are more specific of some actors in a certain place and less specific of actors in other culture, in other contexts, or with other languages. So how can we sort of adapt the work? How can we transform? How can we have to keep this work to sort of travel from one culture to another and still be relevant and fresh and on the point? Also, when you talk about behavior and reading behavior and things like that, is this something we should take into consideration, or we should just a good teacher is just a good teacher and can teach everywhere, and there's no problem, and we don't have to take into consideration what's going on in the country or in the place where you work? We can start with you. We can start with you, Bill. Very, very short. But then I really want to hear everybody about this problem.
I don't know. One thing, I mean, certain cultures have particular problems. What comes up for me is that there are certain cultures, like certain Asian cultures, where men are not allowed to exhibit emotion. It's a very bad thing. And so getting that particular actor to give himself permission to be free and open emotionally, it can be a kind of torturous journey for them. Other than that, I think once Sandy Meisner went to China, Beijing, as a tourist, and they found out he was there, some people, and so they invited him to the theater school there. And he went and he watched, and they did all these things for him. But they do everything in unison, at that time anyway. Everybody's dressed alike, and they're all doing all these exercises in unison. And afterwards they asked him what he thought about it. And he said, "I'm sorry, I thought it was terrible. I think it's awful what you're doing to the actors. You can't take any artist. Artists do not work in unison. They've got to be independent and separate and their own point of view, you know." So you have that. You know. I read an article about a singer from North Korea. In North Korea, you're not allowed to sing solos. You can only be part of a chorus. And she got out of there and went to the South, where they don't like choral music, they like solos. She was having a very tough time because it was to give herself permission to even sing a solo was very hard.
Can you read exactly, for example, Norwegian behavior? Do you think there's a difference in Norwegian behavior, between Norwegian behavior and American behavior?
Not really. Only in the most superficial kind of ways, I think. I mean, people are people. You know, human beings are human beings. And they have a lot in common humanity, really.
I don't see any necessity to adapt, to change the work at all. It might, as Bill was saying, take a little longer with certain people because of cultural conditioning, or even within a certain culture, their own personal experience. But the work itself is not going to going to change at all. No.
Let's say I'm Norwegian and I work for 6 months
Yeah.
on repetition in English.
Yes.
Would I be as spontaneous and
Yes.
as listening
Yes.
in Norwegian?
Well, sir, but we have a lot of foreign students. I mean, but we're accepting foreign, for us, we have to accept foreign students international students, excuse me, who have fairly good English, because there have to be some level of comfort. And initially there's a reserve, but as people are living in the city, they get more comfortable, and there is no difference by the end of that first year in their freedom level as the Native American student. None whatsoever.
Carmelana was really like, she wanted to talk, so can I hear you?
I have a lot to say about this. So thank you for the question. I think it's a really great question, and it's important because of a few questions it raises. Whose theater do we want to make? Is there only one form of theater, for example? We know that there isn't, but I think what can happen when we go into a situation of learning a technique is that one brings into one's mind so that I can conform to a certain kind of theater. So it's a question of whose theater do we want to make, and if we're teaching students, what kind of theater are we asking for them to show us? The other question is, when we're talking about cultural differences, without objectifying certain things, we definitely recognize rhythms are different, because the way people inhabit space, the way they speak. So we experience space differently, and we express that experience rhythmically. Those
there are differences in the languages, so the
sure,
languages
and
are the result of interaction and relationship.
But this is an opportunity. It's rather than something as an obstacle that we have to conform and find a way to fit it. Rhythm is a place where you can meet. It creates open spaces and dissonances, and that's really interesting. So the techniques, no matter what they are, have a beautiful, if they're open, have a beautiful possibility of
can I ask you something?
Dialogue.
You're an American now based in Norway.
Yeah.
What did you have to change arriving to Norway?
I can address this by continuing just to say that in Fredrikstad it's an international school. So we're already confronted with different worldviews and different ideas about how one should move and what is a space. So my first experience of Norway is that it's a place, because my experience in Fredrikstad is a place where people are asking these questions about internationality and interculturalism. So it's not so much an adaptation that I have to make, but I do think there's an exchange that happens. So I learn at the same time I'm teaching. But there's one anecdote really quickly that I want to share with you from my experience with Spider Woman Theater in New York. And my mentor, Muriel Miguel, who we brought up before with the Open Theater, she worked with Joseph Chaikin. And they started working on a process that had storytelling techniques. And Joe Chaikin, she says, came into the room and said, I discovered this way of working with storytelling. And she said, we've been doing that for a long time. And it was this funny meeting of one who's in an avant-garde process who thinks they've discovered a really new, interesting way of getting out of the text. And one who's coming from a cultural background that says, actually, storytelling, where we work back and forth and we develop the story in the moment, in a relation with the audience, is very old. So perspective on whose theater it is and the methods used to make it are always being dealt with in the space. I said more than enough. I think I'll leave it.
Mikael.
I want to say something to this. When I did quite a few some international theater work, and when I go to another country, a very important thing for me is, I think the right word is devotion towards the other culture. Demut? Is this?
Can you give it?
Oh, sorry. It's like when I go to another country, to have a bit of kind of devotion for this other culture. That means, with some cultures the differences are very visible, very big. With other countries they're smaller. But I try to find out a bit about the culture. For example, when you talk to Øystein about Norway, it was interesting for me to hear that, in a way. Because Norway belonged a long time to Denmark, but like there were a lot of farmers here. There was not like a system of very rich people and the poor. What's another? So it's interesting, and says I'm here for a week, but I start these things. I start to think about what does this makes to the culture. Many people own houses or flats or something like this. It comes maybe out of these farmers that they belonged over. They had their country. So I have to find out how I come with my theory, my method. If I just confront them, is it a good idea to confront them just straightly, or is it how do I get the fantasy, the creativity of this world?
Do they all respond in the same way to the same exercises, or in a way you find small differences, or the time of response is different?
I have to, even if you said short response, for me I would say that it's different, but it depends really how strong the difference in the cultures is. But for example, one thing, I traveled through India for 6 months doing theater, and when you do Brecht, for example, today in Germany, you have in a way to adapt Brecht and to think, how can I do Brecht now in Germany, for example. When I traveled through India, I thought, we can Brecht do here as Brecht did it 50 years back, because the people are so open to get maybe a clear moral message. Yeah, where in Germany people say, "Oh, come on, I don't want to hear this moral hammer of morality or whatever." In India, people are on another level and they're very open. They're not used. They didn't see much theater, so they're just taking it in and they are responding and discussing it. So, what I mean is really you have to see where.
Because I think Bill before talked about something very important about acting training, which is to make these principles, as you said the other day, to be some sort of spontaneous, inhabit sort of, how did you say, how did you describe it? I can't remember the word. Something that you can't control, you do it, it's organic, an habit, right? Yeah, a habit. Yeah, a main habit. So I feel that in this process of from when you start working and when something is a main habit, there is probably the middle passages are very sort of important, and so do you adopt a bit some of the work? Do you have to maybe stay a bit longer on certain passages and a bit shorter on other, or?
That's what I would want to say in a way. This is a challenge really to find out with which exercise I can go straightly forward, or which is where I have to adapt to stay a bit longer. But also for me with devotion to understand the other culture and why are they reacting like this? Why is this happening? And not just, oh, you don't understand, so I have to do it longer. Why? What's going on?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Leonard, can we hear your?
Can you hear me? Is this working? No.
Wait, I'll just fix it. Just keep this one.
I teach in lots of different countries, but mostly in Europe, and so it's kind of the same European culture in America as here. But there are differences. I mean, just the other day, for example, we were working with certain improvisations that one of them had to do with complimenting another person and how to receive the compliment one way or another. And just a problem arose in the class where people said, well, we don't do that. We don't do that here. We don't know how to give a compliment, and we don't know how to receive a compliment. So we're confused about what we should do. And so it's like, well, just do this and see how it works. And also, so it's a matter of conditioning, I think. And I taught a lot in Russia, and also struggled with getting students to do certain things just because they felt inhibited by some, it seemed to me, conditioning from their own training. I mean, we're talking about working with actors who had some understanding about something and breaking through it. But, I'm sure, like trying to teach Meisner or Strasberg or even Chekhov in Bali would be, I think, a very difficult thing to do, because what they understand as theater and performance is, and what they want to give to that and give to the public or their audience is a very different thing than what we're trying to do with it. So yeah, I think it's a big difference.
It's interesting because in your technique you talk about, you have this more spiritual, you talk about archetypes, and so in a way it seems that there is a research of going like behind what is like the facade of the local culture, but still you have to struggle a bit with to get there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this, we deal with being a human being, and we like to think that as human beings we're all somehow the same. As I mean, that the human organism is the same, and the processes that go on within the human organism are more or less the same. But we have to deal also with the culture and how we perceive ourselves. And so, yeah, I mean, archetypes are present everywhere in all the cultures, but what they do with them, and whether, like I said, people would want to do what I offer, and what Bill said about this emotion thing, I was teaching some people from Brazil, and we were working with emotions, for example, and so we brought up this idea of shame, to express shame, and these men were, they were, and they were behaving like these coy, this like caricature of a coy woman or something like this. And it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here with this? And they said, well, this is what it is for us men in Brazil. What shame is, we don't know how to do it. And I said, well, how could you possibly come to play Oedipus if you can have no experience of shame? Or if this is your experience of shame, you're certainly not going to blind yourself over this. So it's an interesting thing, just culturally, how people understand things,
Okay, thank you. Can I hear you from the Gov Squad? I'm going to call you from the Gov Squad. You from the Gov Squad. No, because in a way, I think the question is relevant for you too when you talk about when you travel with the same show, since you have so much interaction and you depend so much on the audience. What does it change for you if you play here in Norway or in China and you have to find someone that wants to kiss one of the members of the cast?
I love a pig man. I think another thing is the fact that, of course, we're a German English group, and every single day in rehearsal, we are, as similar as you might think Europe is. We're constantly seeing how different we are and how similar we are. But that's also that we have, there are gay people in the group, there are women and men in the group, so gender, sexuality, class, all of those things also give all of these differences, as well as that some of us are speaking German, some of us are speaking English. And I think that, they're all differences, if you see what I mean, that we have to, sorry? Already there. And we generally rehearse in English, and the Germans in the group are all fantastic English speakers, but, and I was just thinking about something that you were saying about this repeating exercise, is that often we will rehearse to a certain extent in English, but then after we've established a sort of way of being in the space, the Germans will speak in German to each other, and they take it and it changes. Do you see what I mean? Because there is a thing with language. At the moment, the piece that we just premiered on last Saturday is about having conversations. It's about discourse. It's about dialogue, and we, the English, we're aware we constantly have the upper hand, constantly, because I'm better at English, like it or not, than Merit. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I've got all these little colloquialisms that she sometimes doesn't know, so I can beat her in conversation, which is part what this performance is about. It's about competitive conversations. But when you get the two Germans speaking with each other, it takes it onto a different level. Do you see what I mean? So I think that language, it is important, and it is important for a performer that, what language you are speaking. It does change what you say and how you feel.
So do you feel that to keep fresh, you should travel a lot?
There's two different ways of being with the two different issues here. There's one, how we are with ourselves in the space, and the fact that we are crossing cultural borders constantly. And the other one is how we are with our audience, and how that will be different in a different place. And it was very interesting once. I was talking about a while ago, we did Super Night Shot in Oslo, and we did Super Night Shot in Brazil on exactly the same night with different casts. And everybody had such expectations of what, you come to a space and you have expectations of what a place will give you. And then by doing a show like Super Night Shot, where we go out onto the street with our cameras, you get all of those sort of stereotypes, all of those expectations, they can just be blown. And I think that's what it's taught us, because, in Oslo, we were having, people said to us, oh, people here are far too held in, no one will talk to you. Everybody will be very reserved. You might not be able to have conversations. Actually, we had brilliant conversations. People were incredibly open, utterly willing to join in. I mean, it's actually the only one time I was virtually physically assaulted. It was very dangerous here. And which is really weird, because in Brazil, where they expected this, and they had literally bodyguards, of course, it was done totally different, and they were completely safe and everything was fine. Do you know what I mean? And often this happens. People say, I remember in Paris, some promoters came from Paris to see some of our work, and they said, oh, we'd love to have you, but the Parisians will never speak to you. And then eventually they took the risk, took us, and of course they did.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you always perform in big cities, or do you also perform in very, very
Small, tiny little villages.
Tiny little villages too.
Yeah. What does it change?
How many people are on the street?
just that?
No, the psychogeography of the space, of course.
Yeah, sometimes
I'm sorry, I'm being glib. The psychogeography of the space, of course, the cultural context of the space changes entirely wherever you are.
There are many theories from sociologists and anthropologists that, in a way, say that the world is going towards a division between urban and not urban. So, that in a way, big cities have much more things in common than, in relationship, for example, to the countryside, just 1 hour outside of the big city.
Mm.
So, do you experience something like that?
You notice big city mentality and like you do in the centre of London at rush hour. But then you will notice the weather.
Yeah.
It's all so many. You take it. I've talked for
I was going to say that it's it's not just the cultural differences that come into that. It's really the special circumstances of a special evening that make it utterly different. If there's a storm, people are different, And if there's a football game, an important football game happening, or just happened or something, of course, the behavior out in the street is completely different. And so it's the special circumstances of the evening that change it as much as the cultural context. And we find that a lot with Supernatural, that you really get to learn so much about a place, but also about people in a special situation. And it's so interesting with this piece because we have done it really all over the world, from Siberia to India to Africa to the north of Canada. And there's so many places where people tell us beforehand that they think they know how their place will react to it, and they say it won't work. Don't, be prepared. Yeah, exactly. And we are constantly surprised, and then they are surprised too on how, it works. Of course it changes it and all that, but somehow you really learn about people and
Maybe you should talk about also your kiss experience.
yeah, we could talk a lot about that.
But can I hear first something? I want to talk with Hans for a second, if I can. Can you pass the microphone to Hans? Because you are a living experience of an adaptation, in the sense that you studied in Russia, and then you came over here to Norway, and Irina came with you, and you worked with her and translated also the book, and so you've been working on adapting a special work for this school, for this culture. How was that?
So many things, but I think the interesting part of that question
is these sort of insights or understandings that was made of Stanislavski in the beginning of the century, who has the last century, has so many different sort of ways of practice. The interesting part of it is that very many of the people I have met and who is working with this are talking about universally things. That this is something universal. You can use it on whatever, wherever. That's a very common understanding of people working within this, what you call it, field of acting. And my understanding of this is that there is some truth in that, but there is very much untruth in it too. That there is a habit for every school or every tradition to not managing to make the difference between what is real, the real thing, which is universal, can be used in very many ways, and is very flexible, and can have many different sort of expressions, and the habits of the school, which is not universal. And that habits, as I have said before, is part of a cultural situation, history. It's a part of the time when the different things were developed, and it's very crucial when you are working with those insights, which is very deep insights and very, very good insights and very strong insights, to try to be an artist within it, wherever you are, in Germany, in Japan. When you can see Japanese actors doing this at a very high skill level in Usu's films, for example. It's not hard to find a good Japanese actor from a very different culture doing this on a super high level. So it hasn't to do with culture as such. But of course, the Japanese are behaving this different than people from Norway or people from Russia. In Russia, you have a screaming mad lady in every door, in every house. Somewhere, there is someone who has gone mad in St. This is a very big part of the culture. This emotional, this part of it. You know, it's so, and you don't find that so often in Norway. So these cultural habits and that make different theaters, different film, different art. So
okay.
I don't know if I was very clear.
Yeah, you were. Thank you. Ed.
Well, I'd like to pick up
Yeah.
on what he said. I'm going to have to deal with an ethnic group here when I talk about this. Sometimes a culture is affected by sometimes external events that create a collective consciousness and a collective habit, all right? I directed a play by a well-known playwright at the time, William Saroyan. It was called Armenians. There were 20 characters in the play. So we did it off Broadway at a theater, and Saroyan came into town. I knew him slightly, and I asked him to come to talk about these Armenians. This play took place in 1920 in Fresno, California, where there are a lot of Armenians that gathered there. They were all affected by the genocide, the alleged genocide, some people say. And they congregated in this play. They congregated in a coffee shop and to talk about things and to talk about old times and things like that. Then when the subject came about the genocide, things changed. And I asked Saroyan, well, I want you to come in, talk to all of the actors, and tell me something about these characters. Did you know these characters? Oh, yes, they're all based on real people. I know them all. He was a very outgoing person. I knew them all. So he had a photographic memory. He went all around the room and he told everybody how their individual instincts were, individual behaviors were. This guy picked up the coffee cup this way, he drank it this way, this man was dressed this way, and he said, all those specific things. It was amazing. But then he said they started talking about the genocide. At that time, the whole physical demeanor of those people altered. They changed. They became like this. The emotional outburst that came out of a body that was not relaxed, not like this. They were like this physically. Each one had a physical stature related to the emotion, but it would be related to that emotion. It created a series of wonderful physical pictures. That was what we tried to do in the play. We never accomplished it. I had American actors, all actor studio people, and they were doing their own thing, and once in a while you'd have one person would do that kind of thing. But there was an example, you know, of an event that had a very powerful cultural effect on a group of people.
Yeah. Okay. So we've been talking a lot. We've been using words like behavior and stuff like that, and that's where I wanted to to go, because yeah, I'll give you wait a second. Because I mean, there's human sciences, there's biology, there's neuroscience, there's psychology, which is part of human sciences. They're studying these things. They're not very easy to. There are discoveries that, in a way, sort of change our collective cliché understanding or use of these words. Also, like studies that proves why and how empathy is created and things like that. What should we do with these discoveries? Do they have, like, should we take them into consideration? Or the job we're doing is just a practice, and so the words we use are images that sort of work because they create change, produce change in the actors, so we should just keep them the way they are? Or should we sort of challenge our terminology, the things we do, in order to take in these new discoveries or this new information that we get from science? Do you understand the question? You don't understand the question?
Maybe it's a bit like learning through doing.
Yeah, can we hear, maybe it clarifies itself. Yeah.
I don't know, but maybe, because if you're involved in a process...
Could you keep the microphone
I'm
on?
sorry.
Yeah.
If you're involved when you're involved in the process of generating material for a certain concept that you have, maybe you're always open to what's, we're very lucky, there's 7 of us, so it's like 7 receptors of what's going on in the world. And, we're all reading different books, watching different documentaries, researching different areas, and so, of course, all of those tentacles come back into the process. And so maybe if something is being picked up and that relates to the situation that we're in, we learn, it's like learning through doing. So, do you see what I mean? So,
yeah.
So then in the process you have a way of saying, oh right, this is something that's happening at the moment that we're really interested in. We were recently talking about the whole thing of, oh God, what's it called? When people are in a coma, they've recently discovered that, what's it called again? Like still, huh? Yeah, they can hear what's going on, and they're incredibly locked-in syndrome. And we were talking a lot about this locked-in syndrome and how that related to anything, because you relate everything to what you're doing, And so we were talking about this locked-in syndrome and how that worked, and I think that, so in your process, you play all those little receptors and things that are going on, come into the work in some way. And because of that, I started reading Coma.
Yeah.
you know, it's a different thing, but I don't know if that's what you mean. But,
Yeah, but maybe I will clarify asking a question to you, Leonard. For example,
because
if
I've got it wrong.
no, you did actually, you gave a very interesting answer, but yours is more an artistic practice. I just want to, for example, maybe it clarifies itself. If, for example, quantistic physics comes tomorrow and proves, and with a discovery and demonstrate what energy is, or what sort of, what energy is, and it's sort of something that doesn't really fit with, the work on the energetic body and that stuff. Would the work still be relevant, or would that sort of create some doubt in your practice? Or is this sort of just, in a way, it's an image that talk directly to many artists that is still very important and relevant?
I mean, I think you can only work with things that are true for you. And if they came up with some quantic theory about and it negated the existence of energy, that wouldn't mean anything to me at all, because I work with energy and it's a truth for me, and it works. It's a very effective thing. So, I would be interested in reading it, perhaps, or if they, came up with some other ideas about how it could be used, I might be interested and open to that, certainly. But if science is going to prove to me that it doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. I have an imagination, and I have a will, and I have a way to work and teach, and I can see how it's effective on the students. So no, that's not going to mean anything to me.
And if you were in a school like this, for example, and the ministerial culture would say, well, we can't finance your Michael Chekhov technique because it's not academic. We can't put it on an academic sort of level. I mean, it's
well, that's basically what happened to Chekhov's work in Russia. They basically said you can't do this anymore, right? And he left, and when he left, they told people you can't do this anymore. So, but people continued to do it. They just didn't talk about his name. They passed the book under the table and all that sort of thing, and they just didn't talk his name. But I mean, you can't take away something that's truthful to a person, certainly by law or whatever. So if that were the case, I'd continue. I'd call it Leonard Petit technique, and not Michael Chekhov technique or something.
Yeah.
Talking about the difficulty of the artist in society. Like Akhmatova, am I pronouncing correctly? Akhmatova, a great poet. Akhmatova. I remember reading that Stalin, she was forbidden to write poetry. And so when she had a poem, she would write the poem, and a friend of hers would come and memorize it. And then they would burn the paper that was written on. And so at a certain point, her whole output was in the memories of her friends, which I thought was, I get upset when I think about that.
Before, when you were explaining,
that's a different thing. That's not what
when
we're talking about.
Sorry, when you were explaining something before, you mentioned the neurological system, and you mentioned some of these things. So, if a neuroscientist will come to you and say, "Wait, Bill, I mean, what you're talking about, it's interesting, but from a neuroscientific point of view, it's not exactly accurate." What would you say?
Yeah, but you see, we're not scientists, we're artists. And scientists are very objective about facts. These are facts. We don't care about facts because it's not the facts, it's what they mean to us. It's just very subjective. We always have a subjective response to, that's the artist's response, is subjective. I want to paint these apples because the color of them just excites me so much.
So would you agree that in a way the history... We're going to be done. Sorry. So would you, the last question, we're going to keep talking about this tomorrow, okay? Would you agree with the idea that maybe then the history of acting training is somehow the history of effective images that help the teacher to produce a change and transformation in the student?
No, I think what produces a change and transformation, I mean, Stanislavski was working with Russian actors of the last century. They had a whole different reality than the theater those people were going into. In America, we don't have any time. They work 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and the audience is there. You go on you're shooting some television. There's no time at all. It's all hurry up, let's go, let's go, let's go. No, we can't do that take again. That's it. That's good. Don't worry about it. Let's go. It's crazy. And film the same way. I mean, I had a student who was so excited. He got a job with Soderbergh, you know, and it thrilled him because he was so admired him so. I said, "So Yul, how was it?" He said, "I'm telling you, it was nothing. I mean, we went there. Soderbergh said, "What are you going to do?" "Show me." "Oh, okay. Stand there, do that." What are you going to do?" "Oh, stand there, do that. Give me the camera." "Okay, go." Action. "Oh, thank you very much. It's very good, very good." I didn't even know what the hell happened. You know what I mean? And then he was in War of the World, and same thing. He got excited about what's his name, Spielberg. I'm working with Spielberg. So he goes on set. Spielberg says, "Okay, here's who's the star of that? Tom
Cruise?
Yeah, this is Tom, this is you. Okay, guys, you're going to come in over there around that fire there, walk here, the wrecked car here, you walk through here and out over there. Okay, let's do it." And that was over. You know what I mean? So we don't have endless amounts of time to rehearse professionally unless somebody, you know, carves out their own niche and their own company and their own thing. So that affects the training. Because people not only have to be good, they got to get good fast. So, you know, you're thinking of that. I mean, that really affects you.
Okay, great.
What are they going to do with your training? Where are they going to take it?
We have to stop here, and so thank you. It's great. It was a very good day. Thank you very much.